us for this webinar this afternoon. We are very excited about this webinar on sustainability and lessons that we can draw from a business perspective about sustainability. It's a very topical matter at the moment as we are really depleting the resources of Mother Nature, and we are therefore very grateful to Wiam Haddad, the ecologist of ZZ2, for kindly agreeing to address us on this matter. So Wiam, you are very welcome and thank you very much for agreeing. We also welcome Mr. Tommy van Zyl, the CEO of ZZ2 this afternoon. Tommy, thank you very much for joining us. And I'll ask Tommy in a moment to introduce Wiam to everybody this afternoon, but also to Tommy for joining us. Thank you very much, Tommy. And then, of course, also a word of welcome to all Tommy and Wiam's colleagues from ZZ2. And I would also like to thank everybody at ZZ2 who helped us to make this possible this afternoon, particularly Iselda, who worked very hard to coordinate diaries, get systems going, etc. Thank you very much to everybody at ZZ2. Likewise, our WITS Business School colleagues joining us this afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. You are very welcome. And likewise at WITS Business School, as always, quite a number of people worked very hard in making this possible. So let me rather not thank people by name, but thank them generally, as I might leave out one of my colleagues, and I hate to do that, but thank you very much for putting this together, getting this to work. We are really excited about this presentation. So, Tommy, can I call on you to introduce Wiam to the audience, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Yani. I'm very pleased to join with Wiam, you and your distinguished guests today to talk about sustainability. And I want to introduce you with commendation to my colleague, Wiam Haddad. He is ZZ2's ecologist and Chief Sustainability Officer. Wiam was an excellent student and still a very keen observer of things around him. He read at the University of KwaZulu-Natal with supervisor Professor Matthew Roger, an MSc for environmental science, and his thesis was titled Balancing Agriculture and Ecological Needs, Biodiversity, Land Use and Ecosystem Services in the Kudus River catchment in the Limpopo. And he got his MSc cum laude. That's after he did the same BSc honors in plant science ecology at the University of Pretoria, which he also achieved cum laude under Professor Bram van Wyk and Matthew Roger. Wiam has worked at ZZ2 since 2015, and he's responsible for various projects related to biodiversity and ecosystem integrity. And he's specifically tasked to scientifically validate and intensify ZZ2's natuurboerdery concept. Natuurboerdery meaning to farm in harmony with nature in a sustainable way. He's also worked a very interesting program in 2012-13 with the Department of Environmental Affairs and South Africa's National Antarctic Program. He was on Marion Island, the 69th overwintering team, and he worked there as a field biologist. And he worked on the marine mammal program and the long-term population biology projects on the islands, seals, and the killer whales. He's also undertaken further expeditions. He was part of the 2015 scientific relief expedition to the sub-Antarctic Mariana Island again. And he also went in 2019 to the Southern Ocean Seasonal Experiment Antarctic Research Voyage. He's also published as a first author in various journals, the Polar Biology, the South African Journal of Botany, and Dendron. He's also holding professional memberships in the South African Council for Natural Scientific Professions, and he's also been invited by the Produce Marketing Association as a member of the International Sustainability Task Team. So Wiam is an achieved scholar and making a very valuable contribution to ZZ2's quest to be a company that creates sustainable value for all our stakeholders, from our customers right through to the natural areas that we are custodians for. So with that said, Yani, it's my big pleasure to hand back to you and to introduce Wiam with commendation to you.
Thank you very much, Tommy. Thank you very much for doing the introduction of Wiam. Ladies and gentlemen, Wiam will do the presentation, and after the presentation, there will be opportunities for general questions, and I underline general questions, which my colleague Jane will then group together so that we put them to Wiam in a structured fashion, so that we have time, if necessary, to cover a broader spectrum of questions. So, Wiam, we're in your hands. Thank you again for agreeing to address us this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Prof. Yani and Tommy, for the introductions. It's a great honor and a privilege today to have a discussion around a topic that's really dear to my heart, and I think that is becoming more and more relevant to all parts of society, not just interested and academic types. It's becoming widespread. I want to start the presentation with a question, and I want to invite, maybe if we can spend a minute or two on the chat function, just to get an idea from the audience what your thoughts are about that question posed. What is the role of business in society? And when I write the business in brackets, and for the rest of this presentation, the definition that I'll be using of business is private enterprises, businesses, even corporations, groupings of people that do things. So not governments or NGOs or individuals. Any thoughts in the chat bot, in the chat thingy? Nothing?
Nothing yet. So if we could encourage our guests just to put your thoughts in the chat box on the question Wiam has posed. What is the role of business in society? Just your thoughts, please put them in the chat box.
Yeah, we've got a few. Innovation, create value for society, some degree of social responsibility in an unequal society. I like that one, create value for society. Then we can ask, what is the definition of value? To be a good corporate citizen. Okay. I hope the theme of sustainability hasn't primed the audience to go for soft answers, coexistence, efficient use of resources in a sustainable manner, to create opportunities for personal economic growth, shared value creation. Okay, it looks like we're talking to the right crowd. Balance between stakeholder and stockholder value. Excellent. Okay, well, let's see. I want to start with an example. You might have heard about the American Dust Bowl. The central prairies of North America was a grassland habitat, very similar to parts of the Free State or Northwest Province in South Africa. After the Civil War, people started settling in this grassland prairie, and they started working the land. And more people moved there. And slowly but surely, they started undermining the ecological integrity of the ecosystem in which they were plying their trade. And they were weakening that ecosystem every successive year with every extra hectare plowed up. They were weakening the functionality of that ecosystem. And that grassland was literally turned into a desert. And they didn't respond on the feedback they got. And then one event, a tipping point event, a drought came in the 1930s, early 1930s. And it sent the whole ecosystem over the brink. So they turned the grassland into a desert through their actions. So their business wasn't really sustainable. And it led to a lot of suffering, health problems, wider than just that area. They had major dust storms as far away as Washington, D.C. And it took the government a long time and a lot of resources and a lot of effort to stabilize the area again. Through regenerative practices, they planted trees and they started doing contour plowing and covering the soil a little bit. It took them a long time. But that's an example of really unsustainable actions. And this is where we don't want to be. And luckily, the world learned some lessons from examples like this. Now, on that somber note, just to set the scene, I want to share with you quickly the goals of the next 30 minutes together. I'd like to start by unpacking the concept of sustainability a little bit and giving it some meat, because it is a very amorphous and kind of woolly concept. And then I want to introduce you to 5 key insights from nature that is relevant to business and the sustainability of businesses. I think so. Well, it will hear the questions afterwards. And then I want to introduce the thought that business, private enterprise, is really, really well positioned to shape and to build and to create and to be the driving force behind a transition towards a sustainable economy of the future. And then after discussing it with Prof. Yani earlier this week, we decided to add a little bonus at the end. I want to postulate the hypothesis around the new economic system and hear your thoughts just for fun. At this point, I must also note that a lot of these ideas and concepts and kind of insights from nature that we'll be discussing today, it's not only my ideas. There's a lot of people that have contributed to the ZZ2 think tank over many years. So this is kind of a distillation of many thoughts, and it's by far not comprehensive. There's many more thoughts and ideas floating around here. This is just a selection of that, and I'm in the privileged position to share these with you. I also want to note that this presentation is very theoretical and kind of philosophical, and the reason for that is to make it as universally available to various different businesses. So here and there, I'll point out an example directly from agriculture that's relevant to ZZ2's business, but we try to keep it on the theoretical level so that it can be relevant in any sector or any business, big or small. And we apply most of these ecological insights to ZZ2, but we might not go into the level of example today. So let's get cracking. is anything sustainable? What is the definition of sustainable? The broadest definition is it's the capacity to endure. Sustainability comes from a Latin word that basically means to hold on. In the ecological sense, ecology describes biological systems that remain diverse and productive over time. So systems that just keep ticking over. And then probably the nicest definition in a societal and business sense is that sustainability focuses on meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And that definition has been articulated schematically as 3 pillars. They call it the 3 pillars of sustainability. First, you've got the physical and biological environment. And nested completely wholly within that natural environment is your society. So that's the human environment. So culture, religion, interactions, everything to do with human society. And nested completely inside society is the economy. So that is doing only with transactions, value, money, those kind of things. But where does businesses fit in? Businesses actually take part and have a stake in all 3 of those pillars of sustainability. In fact, businesses are actually very well positioned to shape the relationship between those 3 pillars of sustainability, because businesses deal with the economy, society, and the natural environment. And that concept of the positioning of business within the realm of sustainability transitions is what we want to explore a little bit more today. But first, 5 insights from the natural world that we could apply to business systems. So insights from ecosystems that we could apply to business systems in the pursuit of sustainability. And we'll unpack these in a bit more detail. So the first one is everything is a cycle. This is a picture of the carbon cycle, but in nature there's many cycles. The nitrogen cycle, the water cycle, the life cycle of a butterfly, caterpillar, pupa, butterfly. There's seasonal cycles, the earth cycles around the sun. Everything is a cycle. Things need to keep moving to stay relevant. And in a way, businesses already understand this concept. The idea of cycles is very well entrenched in businesses. If you look at the word field, cash flow, market movements, depreciation or inflation, the world of business knows movement and is definitely not static. So there's good common ground already. Another key part to a cyclical system is that the whole system must take part. If you've got a little critter there or a fish there that doesn't do its bit in the cycle, it affects all the other players in that cycle somehow. And businesses already know this and practice this as well. So complex systems are always in flux, and sustainability is a challenge only to complex systems, to systems in flux, systems that need to keep moving the whole time, because a linear static system moves from one point to an end point, a solid end state, that's where it wants to be. But sustainability, you actually want to keep moving the whole time. You don't want to reach an end point. So in a way, businesses shares that challenge with ecosystems, both wanting to keep moving the whole time. And yeah, I want to highlight the example from a book called The Living Company, written by Ari de Gees, who was a big player in the Shell company, the Royal Dutch Shell. And he coined and developed the idea of a river company versus a puddle company. He said a river company is a living company. It's like a river. It keeps moving. It gets its energy from many small streams, accumulating them. and it always keeps moving. And when you go to a point in the river, it's never the same water that's at that point. Rivers also associate, there's a boat that may be floating on the river. It's not part of the river, but it adds to the river, and there's a mutual benefit to both, as opposed to puddle companies, which are stationary and not moving. Puddle companies tend to get stale after a while and evaporate and disappear. So everything is a cycle, everything needs to keep moving. To develop this idea of cycles a little bit further, let's look at examples. This is, as you can see there, GDP per capita, and it goes up. It's a graph, and it could be many things. It could be carbon used or whatever. There's many graphs in today's economy that looks like this. But if you go to nature and you study natural systems, there's really nothing that looks like this. At least not that ends there. There's a lot of things that partly look like this, but there's no stable ecological example that I could think of that has a graph or a distillation that looks like that. In nature, we do get graphs that look like this. There's many of them, the normal curve, and you can see that the GDP curve kind of fits in there, which makes me think that we're not seeing the whole picture in terms of that GDP curve. And this is Shelford's law of tolerance, where he basically says there's an optimum range for a certain species or grouping of species, populations, where they will be successful. And towards the tails, it's not a nice place for them anymore, and they're not tolerant of those conditions, and you won't find them there. So if we extrapolate this to economical thinking, is the question I want to pose, and there's probably not an answer. Where does our society's optimum range lie? We've grown up to a point. Are we going to continue growing? Are we going to flat down? Are we going to maintain? Are we going to crash down again? The law of tolerance. That's how ecosystems work. And remember, society and the economy is completely enclosed by the environment. So in all likelihood, the same principles will count. And I want to introduce, maybe you've seen this before, but I want to leave you with this idea. This has been developed by a grouping at the Oxford University. I think they call themselves the Climate Change Initiative, or something like that. The key driving force behind it is an economist called Kate Raworth. And she says this is the 21st century economy. It's not going to be the growth economy. It's going to be a cyclical, circular economy. And the purpose of actors in this economy is going to be to maintain the balance. And the central thought behind it is we have a social foundation that we have to establish and maintain. And there's a definite ecological ceiling that we cannot grow beyond, or that we cannot exceed, because that's going to send us, it's a tipping point that will probably send us into a place like the Dust Bowl, for example. So the economy is going to have to function in between the social foundation and the ecological ceiling. That's going to be the challenge for the 21st century, and that's probably, in an economic sense, what sustainability is going to be. Businesses and players in the economy is going to have to maintain that balance, and if they can, they will be sustainable, and if they can't, they may not. Right. That's the first insight. The second insight from nature is the idea of adaptive and open systems. You might have heard about Darwin's finches and adaptive radiation. And the idea behind that is a bird with certain characteristics was introduced to a new habitat, and there were many different niches that this bird could exploit, and it radiated into various forms of specialization to be able to sip nectar, to be able to probe insects, and to be able to crush seeds. So from a central basic unit, it had the capacity to adapt and utilize various different niches, various different opportunities. How do we do that in businesses? Because that is a key ability to remain sustainable. As things change over time, the ability to adapt gives you sustainability. Those that cannot adapt, we don't find them anymore. We find them in the fossil record, but you can't find their descendants, the radiation of their descendants. And yeah, I want to highlight some points of the open living system as originally developed as far back as the time of Aristotle in ancient Greece, and to show the contrast between living systems and closed mechanistic systems, which have traditionally been how businesses and companies function, and to show the difference between the two. And right, so the first key point, obviously, is being able to adapt. Living systems are in a constant process of becoming, where closed and mechanistic systems have established this is who we are. They're already in existence, but that means they can never change again. So you lose the ability to adapt. Discontinuity versus continuity in natural systems, as in, I mean, COVID was a good example of discontinuity. Things change in a non-linear, unpredictable, sudden fashion. Change occurring, predictable, regular intervals is not really a very natural phenomenon. So we should rig ourselves to be able to handle discontinuous changes. Irreversibility versus reversible. The future is there to be created and discovered and understood. There might be some elements of the past in the future, but it's going to be new. There's going to be new things. It's not an extrapolation of the past. You cannot really predict the future based on the past. An outward perspective versus an inward perspective. In ecosystems, all players, plants, animals, insects, they're all aware of the things around them. Their perspective is very much outward, and they're positioned in that ecosystem. Whereas being inward, centralized, isolated, like many people or man-made institutions do, leaves you vulnerable to changes in the outside and takes your ability to adapt, hampers that. Directed at others, that goes very much to the former point, versus directed at the self. And then horizontalism versus verticalism. So horizontal or network structure, flat structure is a very natural structure. Things integrate and talk with one another. The vertical system has a very long feedback loop, and usually change happens too fast for that vertical system to adapt to it. So that's our second insight, the ability to remain adaptive as a living system or an open system, as opposed to a closed mechanistic system. The third key insight from natural systems is how we manage relationships and how we live symbiotic. Symbiosis, sym meaning together and biosis meaning living. So symbiosis is how we live together. And there's four main types of symbiosis. You can see them there. Commensalism, where one player is neutral, the grey guy, and one player benefits, the green one. Then predation and parasitism both have one player that benefits, green, and one player that is negatively affected. Predation is usually a strong one, consuming completely a weaker one. Parasitism is usually a sneaky small one that leaks, steals energy and nutrients from a bigger organism. And then mutualism is where both organisms benefit from the interaction, from the relationship. And as humans, we actually are in the position to decide what kind of relationships we want to have. We're not powerless to the forces around us to a large extent. And the insight is we should aim for mutualism, because mutualistic relationships in nature seem to be the most sustainable, and they seem to be the ones that create the most value and last the longest. And the oldest symbiotic mutualistic relationship in nature that we could think of is billions of years ago, when life just began. A large single-celled organism, something like an amoeba, this is called the endosymbiont theory, consumed completely an algae, a single-celled algae, with the ability to photosynthesize, and the amoeba couldn't. And instead of being consumed, being predated, they actually created a mutualistic relationship whereby the photosynthetic organism remained living inside the amoeba. And this is where we get chloroplasts from in plant cells. So in plant cells, you have a cell, and inside there's another little kind of cell that photosynthesizes, that gives plants the ability to make energy from sunlight. And we would never have higher life than plants if it wasn't for that initial mutualistic relationship between the algae and the amoeba that together formed a big cell that can photosynthesize. That's the oldest mutualistic relationship I can think of, but probably there was predation also at that time, so don't quote me on that. If we go further on with the relationships and symbiosis, we looked at those 4 symbiotic relationships, that's 1-to-1. But if we start looking at an ecosystem level, how many-to-many relationships start structuring themselves to create patterns, we talk of this food web, and in the food web there's trophic levels or feeding levels. At the bottom, you usually have a primary producer, something like grass that photosynthesizes, and then there's a first consumer, a primary consumer that eats that grass, and there's some energy conversion and a little bit of a loss on each step up the trophic levels. There's energy that's lost, but there's higher levels of specialization, so higher value. This eagle needs to invest strong talents, keen eyesight, great flying ability, that the grasshopper and the grass don't have to do. Now, you might have seen there's a popular video that was going around about the reintroduction of wolves into the Yellowstone National Park in America, and how the whole ecosystem changed by just bringing back the top predator that was missing for a number of years. If you disturb the balance between these trophic levels in any food web, you get effects that's not always predictable and not always positive. Now, if we relate that to business operations, and I've got the example of the agricultural value chain there, you can change it to any sector. In agriculture, we rely on ecosystems, soil, water, sunshine to grow stuff. And in a way, we just manage ecosystems to produce good quality, high volume of tomato or avocado. So that's the farm, that's the production component based on the ecosystem. Then you go to the retail aspect, which is packaging, distribution, marketing, to the end, the consumer. And the consumer, in a way, really dictates the whole food web below it. But in a way, the primary producer also has an impact on the consumer. So there's an up-down relationship there that must be balanced to be sustainable. If there's a misalignment or too much weight or irregularity in terms of the energy conversion, value conversion up this chain, you may not be sustainable and your food web may collapse. So that's the third insight from nature, is symbiosis and the relationships in food webs. The fourth one is probably the most abstract insight, and the one that could probably be unpacked the most on a philosophical debate. It's order and chaos. Because in nature, things tend to go to chaos. If you leave stuff, they start falling apart and it turns into chaos. But biology uses the rules and the laws and the tools of physics and chemistry to create order. We're multi-celled organisms as people. It's a huge amount of order that goes into a body. And then there's high levels of order that's created, how species interact with one another, creating ecosystems. So in the natural world, there's quite a lot of order that's been created. But it takes energy and it takes effort. And in a way, that's what businesses do too, is they create some sort of order out of a manner of chaos. But you could use different words there. We can say opportunity versus predictability. Chaos brings us a lot of opportunity. Order gives us a lot of predictability. Now, where does sustainability lie in that? The natural law, I want to quote there, is Riedel's order laws. This is an Austrian zoologist. And he identified 4 ordering principles that allow organisms to create order, biological order, out of loose molecules and pieces. And he said the ordering principles there are parts. There's a number of standard parts. And you create order by arranging these parts in assembly, interdependent assembly, and you can have various outcomes based on how you assemble set standard number of parts. To give you an idea, the genetic code that governs all life forms, everything that's alive has some genetic material in it. It's made out of 4 base pairs, 4 different chemical molecules arranged in different ways in long strands give you the diversity of life. So that's parts arranged in different independent assemblies, and these arrangements create some kind of hierarchy, and this hierarchy creates constraints. For example, humans don't have wings, so we can't fly with constraint. And it's an up and down constraint. And then there's a manner of tradition or inheritance, which is a form of constraint over time. But this gives just enough momentum for things to carry on and in a way sustain itself. So why I put this in here for sustainability and businesses is, where is businesses placed on this interface between chaos and order? Obviously, you don't want to be too far into chaos, because then you might not be there anymore tomorrow. So it's not very sustainable being in chaos. But going too far towards the side of predictability, towards order, you lose that adaptive capability. And the most opportune place and creative place and valuable place probably to be for businesses, and most likely the most sustainable place to position using these 4 ordering principles, is right on the interface between chaos and order, there with the black arrows. That's likely the most sustainable place to be. That's the 4th insight from nature. The 5th and the last one for discussion today is the idea of terminal units of a fractal and emergent properties that come out of an assembly of terminal units. And what you see there is a schematic diagram of a tree as a fractal. And fractals are fascinating things. It was discovered originally by a Frenchman Benoit Mandelbrot, who tried to measure the length of countries' borders. And the finer he tried to determine it, the more he realized the length gets more and more, as every time there's a little extra nick and a little crank. And this led him down a pathway to describe fractal systems. And basically, it's a lot of small units repetitively arranged with one another. A tree is a good example. A tree is made up of a whole lot of leaves, some stems, and some roots, but it's just a repetition of the same unit, a leaf and a stick. And the emergent property that comes out of that arrangement of terminal units, leaves, is a tree. Now, fractal systems, and this arrangement of terminal units allows us to create superorganisms. So if you take a bunch of trees and you arrange them together, you get a forest, which is an emergent property again out of the arrangement of a lot of similar terminal units. And the forest takes on a sense of place, an allure of its own, characteristics of its own. It can start creating its own rain. And if you think from a sustainability point of view, a tree will die, but the forest will remain. Trees die in the forest all the time, but new trees are born again. So if you want to look at sustainability, maybe having a tree or a leaf is not, but a forest, yes. Because this is taken here in Maguba's Kloof, close to the farm. That forest was there 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 years ago. But none of the trees we see there today was there that long ago, but the forest was there. And if we do our things right, that forest will still be there 1,000 years from now. Maybe none of the trees growing there currently will still be there, but the forest will be there. And from a business point of view, if you think of a company, it really is the same. The company can be there for hundreds, thousands of years, but the individual people may not be there. It goes back to the rubber company, the idea of the rubber company. So sustainability is to be able to arrange these terminal units of a fractal to get the emergent properties that come out of fractals. Sustainability is an emergent property of complex systems. That's the key point. And to end it off, is private enterprises are actually the best place to be these terminal units, the building blocks that we can build up together as businesses to get the emergent property of sustainability for society and for our economic system, which is being questioned and pointed out more and more in public discourse. So the point I'm trying to make with this is we shouldn't and can't leave it to governments or individuals to drive the sustainability transition, because individuals cannot be the terminal units. We live too short, we're too on our own mission, and governments are too broad. They're not a terminal operative unit like a business or a company is to drive the change. And I want to show that by highlighting this, the oldest company in the world, Congo Gumi. It's a Japanese construction company founded somewhere around 400, 500 after Christ. So that's 1,500 years ago. And it's older than most nation states. I think San Marino is maybe a little bit older, not even. It's older than any constitution in the world. It's older than any laws that's observed today. So that really is it's an example that companies can be the most sustainable vehicles to drive sustainability in our society. Companies are enablers, movers and shakers of the sustainability transition, if we play our cards right. So to conclude, the first insight from nature is sustainability is being of a cyclical mindset. Sustainability is maintaining the building blocks of adaptability as an open system. And sustainability is being a positive symbiont in a greater web of interactions. Sustainability is on the interface between order and chaos, and sustainability is leveraging those terminal units, businesses, to deliver the emergent properties, sustainability transition to a sustainable economic system. That's it in a nutshell. Now I ask the question again, a little bit different. Who does business really serve? Who is the client of businesses? And that leads me to the little bonus hypothesis that just for fun, who does business really serve? We've got, it was coined many years back, Homo economicus. It's the foundation of our economic system at the moment. It's this theoretical model of the markets that make the decisions. Homo economicus is this person. He doesn't like work. He knows the cost of everything. He stands alone on his own. He has no interaction with anyone. He's got money in his hand that he wants to spend on stuff that he wants, and he makes only rational decisions. And for many years, this is the client that the economy and businesses have been serving theoretically. Now, I want to pose the hypothesis, society will be a lot more sustainable if businesses serve a real man rather than the economic man. So I've written the exact opposite there, Homo realiticus. This is someone who works to create meaning and purpose. This is someone who doesn't know the cost or the externalities of his transactions. He doesn't stand alone. He is because of others. He wants to be there because others are there. He doesn't have money in his hand, but he's got a lot of hope and aspiration. And he doesn't make rational decisions. He makes very emotional decisions, like we all know. So that's it. Thank you very much for the time, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you for a most thought-provoking presentation, which I found really most enjoyable. Now, if we turn to questions, the first question I want to put to you is about management and leadership vis-a-vis sustainability, given the fact that we also have a lot of MBA students in this presentation today, and who will look at the video, the YouTube at a later stage. Now, in sustainability terms, everything is about making sure that you can continue. In a business, you have to run your business in such a way that you achieve your objectives today, but that the staff still wants to be, the colleagues still wants to be there. The colleagues want to be there tomorrow to make sure that the business can continue. So just tell us then, from a sustainability basis, what do you focus on to achieve this objective vis-a-vis from a business objective? So, I mean, of course, ZZ2 wants more output, but you want your output in such a way that there's still a ZZ2 tomorrow. How do you achieve that balance?
I think those things go hand in hand. It's also it's a property of natural systems. If you think of trees that grow profusely in spring and summer and save nutrients in their roots because they know in winter they're going to lose their leaves. These little squirrels that hide their nuts away. I think we mustn't overthink it. I think we already know instinctively how to balance what we do now with how it will affect us in future. You exercise now and eat healthily now so that you don't have health problems in future. I think the idea of the Homo economicus is actually forcing us to act unnaturally with a very short-term focus, neglecting and discounting the impacts in future. So I think we shouldn't overthink it. I think we're naturally inclined to think that way. And we've artificially been forced to be very short-term, narrow-minded.
Thank you, Wiaan. It's clear that a lot of people are concerned about the world population growth from the comments we receive. And this group of remarks I can structure in a question to say, oh, and there are a lot of people also worried about climate change. So with an increase in world population and climate change impacting negatively on the environment and farming areas, will agriculture be able to supply the world with enough food? Or are we reaching the limits to where we can feed growing populations?
Yes, that's a good question, and that's one of the key issues that there isn't really an answer to. And I think the solution is probably going to lie in a multi-pronged approach. On the one side, we'll have to look seriously at consumption rates and wastage, because thinking back to natural systems, they're very efficient. There's very little wastage. Everything is used for something. In our current economic system, there's quite a lot of wastage. Energy spent unnecessarily on things that don't fall in that cycle. So we'll have to look at the consumption end, and then on the production side, there's probably still a lot of technological adaptations that will allow us to go up that food web, that conversion from grass to grasshopper to bird of prey, to make that conversion a lot more efficient. So I think the solution is probably going to lie on a combination between technologies driving efficiency on the production side and a reduction of consumption and wastage on the consumer side. And then at some point, we're going to have to balance those two. As I showed with a graph that goes up, that's a very unnatural graph. At a point, it's going to have to turn. Whether we as people and as businesses engineer and create and decide when it turns, or whether the forces of nature is going to turn it for us, that is yet to be determined. I hope for the first scenario.
Thanks, Wiaan. This one is a bit of a follow-up question, but also a bit of a cheeky question. So if you want to pass on this one and pass it on to the CEO, by all means, we will then get Tommy to answer this on a different occasion. But how much by means of efficiency gains have you seen in your time at ZZ2, and how much by means of efficiency gains do you project going forward? And please, if this is above your pay grade, by all means, we will accept.
No, that's a good question, and I'm going to venture answering it, because we had a symposium on the people that practices a few years back, and there was one graph that came out, which is really, I think, the picture of exactly that question, where over the last 20 years, the amount of hectares planted was plotted, and it was a fairly flat graph, around 1,800 hectares of tomatoes being planted. And over the same period of productivity, the amount of tons produced went up like that. And that's not by planting more hectares, that's by just doing things smarter, more efficiently, using better technology. So there was in terms of not a production like that, huge efficiency gains without having much bigger environmental impact. So using the same stuff, but doing it smarter, getting more out.
Thank you, Biam. Then another question, how important is digital transformation and technical innovation to sustainability in agriculture?
Critical, very important. And at ZZ2, digitalization is a major drive at the moment. And what's very exciting is that digital systems are also very similar to natural systems. So there's a lot of similarity there, and it's key. And I think people who are not digitizing in agriculture at the moment are probably taking huge risk on the sustainability of their business.
Thanks, Viam. Yes, for a younger generation, that is, of course, a very topical question, because the younger generation was born with technology. In my generation, we had to pick up technology on the run as we grew older. Very interesting question, Viam. Factory farming is both criticized for what many people see as inhumane conditions for animals, but also praised for being able to supply affordable food to people. How can sustainability and innovation and then in animal farming respond to address the needs of both camps, namely those who feel it's inhumane conditions as opposed to the food need, the need to feed more people, which then, in a sense, brings us back to this question: has the human population on planet Earth exceeded the carrying capacity of the natural ecosystem?
Yeah. So the question in terms of animal farming and high density cattle and chicken and so on, that takes us into another realm of ethics. And I don't think there's an easy answer there. Because if you look at the definition of a living organism, a plant is also an organism. Why should we treat an animal different to a plant? There's a many layers of philosophical and ethical questions that come out of that, and I don't really know. I'm still a little bit torn personally in terms of what is the right thing to do and what is the value of an ethical standpoint in the quest for sustainable systems. I think as the pressure and the need for resources change and the ability for people to cut on their consumption, and so that ethical goalpost is also going to be dynamic and it's going to change. So I find it difficult to take a standpoint because I think tomorrow the scenario is different and then a different standpoint will be relevant. So I'm going to answer you very vaguely on that one.
Thank you, Viam. A question that I really like from someone in the audience is how much of sustainability of agribusiness is about going back to basics? In other words, we had very basic agriculture, say 200 years ago, based on what nature gave us, based on what nature could bring. And how much of sustainability is really going back to the wise use of nature, perhaps like 200 years ago? A very topical question.
That's a good question.
And please, I like any remark about going back to basics.
I think that's a really good question. And I want to refer back to the living open system versus the closed system, and forward-looking and backwards-looking. I think if I look at our own natuurboerdery way of doing, it takes it goes and looks at what was done in the past, and it takes the relevant stuff that's relevant to our current future, because the stakes are different and the variables are different now than it was in the past. And our abilities and capabilities and needs are different than it was in the past. But you can take insights, and you can take some of that technology and some of those principles and apply it to modern day stuff in cahoots or in collaboration or in symbiosis, mutual symbiosis with technology that we have now that we didn't have in the past, to fill the needs that we have now that we didn't have in the past. So I think it's not a black or white, do it as it is in the past or do it as in the future. It's going to have to be a hybrid. But it's for sure that some of the principles and thoughts and concepts that was applied to agriculture in the past is very relevant today. And we do a lot of that, things like compost, we do it at a huge scale, and it gives us an enormous amount of resilience and efficiency in our production system. Things like fermented probiotic broths, which is ancient technology, used with great success today in symbiosis with technology and apps and big data. So I think it's a hybrid model.
Thanks, Biam. Here's another question that I want to tweak slightly. Is sustainable farming easier for large-scale farmers or for small-scale farmers? I'm tweaking the question. But is it easier to be sustainable when you have a large-scale operation like ZZ2, or when you're a small-scale farmer? Or does scale, or would scale of operation not matter in terms of an objective of being sustainable?
No, that's a good question, and I think it goes both ways. There are certain things that's easy to do as a small farmer, and other things that's very difficult. And it's almost the opposite on the other side of the scale. So I want to say it's both difficult and easy for small farmers, and it's both difficult and easy for big farmers. But anything that's really worthwhile should be a little bit difficult. That's why we do it. If it was really easy, why bother doing it?
Thanks. Then we have a very interesting question on the whole agricultural value chain. Sustainability in production, yes, but also in distribution, in marketing, in packaging, in use of packaging, in recirculation of packaging. Can you talk to us about sustainability in the whole value chain? The question that I received here reminds of that triangle we had with the farm at the base of the triangle and the consumer at the top. In other words, sustainability through that whole value chain.
Yes, that's a very good question. So the value chain would be the food web. And this is the sustainability question is, how sustainable is that whole arrangement of parts with various players in interaction with one another, and their effects on the big outside world. There are major challenges, and they are not easy answers. I'm thinking from a production point of view, the input costs in terms of fertilizers, even making compost. If we make a huge amount of compost here and use it here on the farm, it means we're bringing in biological material from somewhere else. So it has an impact there. Once you start mapping that into actions, packaging material, we bring a lot of packaging material here. It's quite a costly thing, and it gets distributed to thousands, millions of end users, and we don't know what they do with it. It gets diluted into the environment. Once you start zooming in on these very specific challenges, it really does start getting challenging. So I focused on the kind of conceptual philosophical stuff today, which is very positive, but once you start getting into the real challenging stuff, it gets a little more difficult. And that's where a lot of opportunity lies for smart business people, but also for engineers and scientists. And we've got a great team here at ZZ2 working on these challenges. It's not a thing that, you know, one or two people can do. It's really a mindset within the whole organism of the organization to find solutions to these challenges, which are great. I don't know if that answered your question, Prof.
Thank you, Aviam. It's a very interesting but challenging aspect, because a lot of that happen. The impact is outside of your control as an agribusiness.
Yes.
Yeah. So then there's a question around sustainability and the SDGs of the United Nations, the Sustainable Development Goals. And the question, if I understand it well, is where does sustainability in agribusiness, where would that fit into the bigger Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, or is that not something that you've looked at before?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. That circle economy that I showed with the social foundation and the ecological seeding, the social foundation, those parameters marked on the inside, those are actually based on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and a number of the ones on the outside, the ecological seeding also, although they use some different research to inform all of those things. I think the position of agricultural businesses to drive the sustainability transition based on those sustainable development goals is great. Like I mentioned, businesses are the terminal units, that the change makers, the places where the change happens. The UN is not going to make the change. They're too big and they don't have teeth in that sense to actually do it. They can create a framework, but the people that's going to have to do the work on the ground to bring about the change of the system is going to be businesses. And if businesses can club together to create branches of terminal units, we're going to start seeing the change that we need to do. And I think the Sustainable Development Goals is a good kind of compass or map to point businesses in the right direction. And agricultural businesses are very well placed to affect a large number of those goals.
I have a very interesting question here. I want to split it in two questions. The first one is, how has ZZ2 considered sustainability in terms of sharing their know-how and expertise with or to support small farmers in the immediate vicinity? For instance, access to resources and capital. So a spillover of best sustainable practices in ZZ2 being shared in the community of small farming around ZZ2. And after this, I will come back to a second part of this question, which I find really interesting.
Okay, I think we consider ourselves to be an open system and to share our things. You know, the metaphor of a big tree that creates some shade for other small trees to start growing up and growing. But I think maybe Tommy is better placed to answer that question in more detail. But principally, we want to do that because that is a sustainable action to take.
The second part of the question I find really interesting and very topical at the moment in South Africa. It's around job sustainability. In other words, let's call it mechanism replacing employment. How do we ensure sustainable employment let's call it in an age of mechanism?
in the age of mechanization, yes. That's a good question. I want to refer back to that picture of the birds that differentiated. There was a bird with certain properties and then new habitats open to it, and it kind of adapted to exploit the opportunities in those different habitat types. In the job market, because things are changing fast, you know, probably 10, 20 years from now, I'm going to do a job that doesn't exist yet. So to remain relevant in the job market, people will have to remain adaptable to grow into habitats or careers that don't exist yet. How businesses like agribusiness like ZZ2 is placed to help create these new jobs and to help people transition from jobs that have become obsolete or mechanized, I think is going to be critical. And I think that's also where businesses are very well placed to aid in the sustainability transition or the transition to new jobs, is to help their workers or employees to make that transition, because a university is not going to do that, government's probably not going to do that. You're going to have to be able to adapt and learn on the fly in your current job before it becomes irrelevant. I don't know if that answers the question.
Thank you, Liam. It's of course a very important answer, not within only a farming environment, but any business environment. It's necessary for all of us to get new skills, to keep on learning, to keep on growing, to make sure that we remain employable. Our horse farriers were in high demand 150 years ago. Today, the demand for that career is very small. They had to get new skills. I have a very interesting question here. If sustainable farming is so crucial to human survival, why does it make up such a small percentage of GDP?
Sorry, Prof, can you repeat?
If sustainable farming is crucial to human survival, why does it make up such a small percentage of GDP, such a small percentage of economic output?
It's that you don't know what you don't know until it's too late. I think, you know, you can ask the same question if renewable energy is so important, why do we still have so many coal-fired power stations and are we building more? I think that's a human thing. We don't give enough attention to something until it's too late. It is important, but it's people are not realizing it yet. Does that answer the question, Prof?
Yeah. No. Thank you, Liam. It's a very good question. Now there's a question around tomato production, which I want to put to you. But just before I put that question to you, which is a very good question, is just give the audience an indication, other than tomatoes, just broadly, of what other products ZZ2 produces, as admittedly so, ZZ2 is best known for tomatoes. But just a rough indication of 5 or 6 other important products. I mean, you produce many products, but the other 5 or 6 most important ones, other than tomatoes, just to give the audience a bit of a broader understanding of ZZ2 operations in terms of sustainability.
Yeah, for sure. We've got a diverse product lineup, and having diverse products gives you a little bit of sustainability too. So our tomatoes is the main, is the key thing that we're best known for, and that's mainly focused on the South African market, where we've got a very big market share. And it's a relatively high volume, relatively low cost product. Then we've got big production in avocados, which is a different product again because it's mainly aimed for the export market. And it's a little bit of a lower volume, higher value type of product, so it's a different class. Avocados for mainly the European market, but we're also looking at the Eastern and the American markets, and then of course the South African market too. And then in a similar kind of class is apples and berries, stone fruit, and pome fruit, which is grown in the Western Cape and Eastern Cape provinces for the export market into Africa, Europe, and also locally. And then some new products that we're busy developing or investing into is a superfruit group. It's a very high value, low volume type of product that you can really do amazing things with. Most notably, it's cherries, so fresh sweet cherries, blueberries, almonds, and medjool dates, which are very interesting up and coming new products, mostly for the export market, really leveraging South Africa's unique position on the globe from a logistics point of view, but also from a seasonal climate point of view.
So then I want to turn to the question we received is, how many varieties of tomato do you produce as ZZ2? What extent have you engineered the key variety to make it more sustainable to local conditions? So you farm more than one variety. What is your key variety, and what have you done to make it more adaptable and sustainable to your conditions?
I refer back to insight from nation number 1, everything is a cycle. We've got a constant program of evaluating and introducing new varieties. We work with plant breeders that are continuously breeding new types through traditional breeding techniques, mixing pollen from different plants and evaluating the traits of the progeny. And then we plant these seeds and we evaluate it based on our conditions. And we've got cultivar trials with hundreds of cultivars going on continuously, identifying cultivars that's relevant to our conditions, because one that grows on the low-felt farm may not necessarily be well suited for the high-felt farm. So it's a constant process of evaluation and development. And if there's one that works, we use it and we upscale it a little bit. And if it keeps working, it keeps working. If there's a better one that replaces it, it gets replaced. So it's a very dynamic system, and there's a team that's dedicated just to make sure we've got the best, most efficient, most well-adapted cultivars that last the longest, looks the best, and tastes the best to the consumer.
Thanks, Wiam. We have questions around genetic modification, GMO. What is the view of ZZ2 on genetic modification? Where do you stand on genetic modification, and how do you see genetic modification vis-a-vis, on the one hand, sustainability, but then also, on the other hand, very important in terms of feeding a growing world population?
Yeah, okay, that's a good question. We don't use any genetically modified organisms at ZZ2. All our products, be it tomatoes or avocado trees or apple trees, we select the best genetics made out of breeding, so traditional breeding techniques. And a tomato is quite easy to breed because it's got a very short life cycle. But then we've also got technology partners that allow us to create really strong trees through grafting techniques. So you may have a rootstock from one cultivar, and then you graft a top end onto that from a different cultivar that has the fruit for your climate, but the roots adapted to your soil conditions. So from our perspective at the moment, there's really no need to go to GMOs because the traditional techniques from grafting and breeding is more than enough to give us plants that we need. GMOs is an interesting topic that's developing in some industries. Like you hard pushed to not find a GMO, like in the maize industry, for example. I think it's something that's dynamic and it's probably going to change over time, people's perception of GMO and the need to use it as the system adapts. So we'll have to keep watching it and see where it's going. But at the moment, we have no need for that with the crops that we grow. And I don't think we'll be needing it in the near future, medium future, maybe even long future.
Thanks, Viam. Very interesting question from a historic perspective. We know that ZZ2 has been in operation for many years. I mean, from before I was born, let alone from before you were born. But when did ZZ2 start focusing or really start taking sustainability into its production? When did sustainability become an important matter for ZZ2? Probably before you joined. And do you know what triggered the decision to focus on sustainability?
Yeah, I think probably Tommy is a better place to answer that question, but I can give you what I've observed in my time here. I think the seeds for sustainable thinking has been here forever because it's a family business, so that transgenerational thinking has been there from the get-go. The people at the steer of the business are always thinking of the next generation and further. And that makes a huge difference in terms of sustainability. It's that the term of horizon thinking. The stuff that you can see, like on the Tiefburger initiatives, the using of compost, the trying to move away from big chemical interventions, that really picked up speed from the late 90s, early 2000s. That drive was initiated and it's been gaining momentum ever since.
Yeah, you've just made a very, very important point by implication. If I can just tease this out with you, are you saying by implication that the longer your planning horizon, the bigger or the more important the sustainability focus would become? In other words, if you plan for a month or a quarter or even a year, as opposed to planning for a next generation. So the longer your planning horizon, the more or the bigger, the more important the focus on sustainability would be. Is this a lesson for business in your experience?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it links with the question from earlier. How do you balance your immediate needs to make the books balance at the moment with the sustainability initiative in the long term? I think the term of the horizon of decision making allows you to easily take a hit today to be able to benefit 2 or 3 or 4 times from it in future. Whereas if you've got a short-term horizon, you discount the impacts in the future disproportionately to the benefits from today. So that's why I think family businesses or multi-generational thinking businesses are very well primed to drive the sustainability transition. Governments are probably not, because they've only got a 4-year term of decision making until the next election.
Viam, that is an excellent insight, and probably looking at the time, the point where we will bring this afternoon session to an end. I have a lot of people to thank for having made this possible. Thank you, my colleagues at WBS, the colleagues at ZZ2, to you specifically, Viam, thank you very much for talking to us this afternoon, for sharing your insights. This last insight is then a lesson for our postgraduate and MBA students, that you need long-term thinking and long-term planning and need to factor sustainability into that. And the shorter your thinking horizon becomes, the less focus you will have on sustainability, which is a very important message, a takeaway from today's presentation. So for that insight, for sharing insights with us, Liam, thank you very much. And then also a specific word of thanks to Tommy for introducing you, for attending today's session. Our best wishes, Tommy, accompany ZZ2 and you personally for the example that you set for many of us in your generational thinking, in bringing sustainability into your thinking, and for sharing these insights with us. Thank you very much. We really appreciate. Also then for agreeing that Wiam can address us today for a most insightful presentation. We are most grateful. Tommy, would you like to make a few concluding remarks at this point?
I just want to thank you very much for the invitation and for the platform that you afforded us to talk about the sustainability focus we have at ZZ2. And I want to thank my colleague Wiam for a presentation very well presented. Thank you very much, Yani, and for all your guests for your time.
Tommy. And Wiam, last word to you. You've done ZZ2 proud today. Thank you very much. And to everybody who attended, all those who arranged, as I've said, thank you very much. It was a most insightful presentation. I've learned a lot today. Thank you very much. We look forward to welcoming you at similar WITS Business School sessions, webinars in the future. Thank you.